really excited to introduce Adam Rosenfield from MIT. Kind of going a step beyond Anna's presentation, he's going to be sharing how MIT actually went through the process of changing their parking payment structure and what impact that has had on parkers at MIT. So Adam, take it away.
Thank you, Corey, for the introduction. And I should add a plug that Corey was actually a student at MIT when this project was getting going. So she's had I should give a lot of the credit for this work to her now that she's at Red Amigos. So for this presentation, let me see if I can get the slides going here. There we go. So I want to discuss a case study of MIT as a large urban employer in the city of Cambridge, just outside Boston, that reformed its commuting benefits program to try and reduce single occupancy vehicle commuting to work with the joint goals of reducing our carbon footprint, improving employee satisfaction, and of course, trying to manage the parking crunch that every urban employer is facing. And so this was launched through the branding of what was called Access MIT, with the, again, trifecta of affordable, flexible, and low carbon mobility choices. And so in terms of motivation for this program, MIT campus used to look a lot like this. This was from the, I think, 50s or so. It was just a sea of parking lots everywhere you looked. That same spot today is now much more a place for people rather than cars. And even up to recently, spaces that were all surface parking lots have all been sort of subsumed by either development or space, again, for green space and people. And so this push is sort of relentless in the city, and is forcing MIT to build, when it needs to replace parking facilities, underground. And often these spaces are prohibitively expensive to build. A most recent estimate was about up to $180,000 a space for an underground garage that happened to be near the Charles River. So some technical engineering challenges. And so looking at the context here, the drive alone mode share in the US has been ticking up in recent years, around 3/4 of all commuters. Well, in the city of Cambridge, and especially MIT, that trend has been in a more positive direction and improving. And so we'll talk a bit about how we've been able to achieve this drop up to today from shown here in 2004. So from a research side, I am a master's student at MIT. I'm studying city planning and transportation. And so I'm looking at, in my research, how can workplaces be active players in the world of TDM, and how can we generalize what works at one workplace for others? So how can we see what tools are effective across different contexts of urban proximity to transit, parking regulations, union regulations, like Anna was mentioning. Each place has its own unique challenges, and we want to figure out what works in each context. And of course, using campus as an experimental test bed, given the rich data sets we have here. So I'll jump right into the program that we launched with the goal of reducing parking demand by 10% over these 2 years. So the first key aspect of this is about parking pricing, and this has come up in a few of the prior presentations. If you can switch away from annual permits, this is one of the most important things that we've seen in the research that you can do to sort of turn around the cost equation that parkers or that commuters make when they're choosing what mode to get to work. So what we've done is eliminated the annual permit for the majority of our parkers who are parking in gated lots, so where we can track their ins and outs. And now they only pay $10 a day plus a one-time or an annual fee of $100 a year to park each year. And we cap this at the former price of an annual permit so that it's not too prohibitive for people that do have to park every day. But for most people that park regularly but not all the time, they won't hit that cap. And so there's a daily incentive to save some money and not park that day. And what we've done is we've paired that with a free transit pass for every employee that we built into their ID card. And you might be wondering, this sounds prohibitively expensive, and this was initially a concern of the MIT administration. So what we did is we negotiated with the MBTA, the transit agency here, to offer these passes billed to MIT on a pay-per-use basis. So to the employee, it's a free transit pass, it's a monthly pass. But to the employer, we only pay for the taps that the transit rider actually makes. And what that means is that for the thousands of staff at MIT that still drive to work most days, but sometimes take transit, it's way more cost effective for us to be paying for those few trips per month rather than buying $85 monthly passes for everyone. And we'll get a bit into the results in a moment. This is paired as well with increased subsidies for things like commuter rail and private transit services. And we've actually added a subsidy for people to park at transit stations. So commuter rail stations, you have to pay for parking, and we're offering a slight subsidy of parking at those stations, and so people can then use their free transit pass to make the rest of the trip in. So the last mile or last few miles are free, and it sort of shifts the parking crunch outside of the city. And we paired this as well with an online commuter dashboard with our partners at Ride Amigos to build in aspects of gamification and incentives to add on to the more economic aspects of the program. And many of you have been familiar with the Ride Amigos sort of dashboard. This is the kind of interface that we've been using. So to jump right into some results here, it's been quite promising in the first year of implementation, which was the previous academic year, 2016-2017. And we do biennial surveys at MIT amongst the 10,000 staff and about 11,000 students at MIT. And what we've seen is over the past 2 years, from the one survey to the next, the drive alone mode share has dropped from 30% to only 25%. And that 30% had been around steady for the last decade or so. So this was a market drop that almost entirely was made up of an increase in public transit usage. And so this is, of course, stated data. We don't know how true that is per se, but then we look at what's the actual sort of on-the-ground results. And what we've seen is that permit purchases for parking are quite down. So from the year before, which was when most people had annual, you can see a mix there of annual parking and daily parking, because we offered occasional permits for those that didn't drive every day. From the previous year to the beginning of Access MIT, we saw a drop of about 7%. And most people are now using daily permits. A few are still having to use annual because not all of our lots are gated, so the ungated ones we leave as annual. But even looking at this year, the interim trends in the first half of the year, numbers are way down again. So some of the takeaways, in addition to the SOV mode share that I just mentioned, the actual total days parked on campus as measured by our gated lots has dropped by about 9%. And the peak lot utilization, which we worry about from a infrastructure perspective, has gone down about 5%. What's interesting is the continuing permit holders, those that decided to renew their permit, haven't actually reduced their parking as much, which is suggesting that our daily parking scheme there may be some room for improvement there in how we explain to people that it's beneficial. If you still want to get a parking permit, you can get one, but still save money by not parking as much. On the transit side, we're seeing a pretty substantial uptick in people using transit on a regular basis. Many people are using their pass at least occasionally, but we saw about a 24% increase in staff using the MBTA on a regular workday commuting basis. And the cost to MIT, which was estimated around $2 to $3 million a year, was actually only about $1.5 million a year because of the switch from buying monthly permits to just a pay-per-use basis. So some of the future challenges here, I mentioned sort of the idea of Newton's third law, that for every sort of TDM action, you will get an equal and sometimes ferocious reaction from people that might be angry with the way you're presenting or designing your new TDM programs. And so I think there are some lessons learned here in sort of how you manage the branding and the perception of these programs, in that on the parking side, for example, switching to daily parking with a cap, you can only win. You can only save money from that, because worst case, you pay what you used to pay with an annual permit. But now a lot of people are saving money. But there's still the perception that it's punitive because you're paying more often. And kind of that's the point, right? You're supposed to feel that you're paying money more often, and it's supposed to help you reduce your parking. And so there's a careful balance there between trying to design a program that discourages driving, but not seeming too paternalistic or trying to control what people do in their own commuting time. And so some other takeaways, we're learning sort of what are some of the shortcomings in the technical design of the program in terms of how costs are presented on people's payroll sheets, and of course the system boundary, in that we can nudge people towards transit, but that's only effective if the transit service is reliable, is competitive in terms of travel times. And so part of this is continuing to advocate for improved transit service in the greater Boston region. And so next steps will be streamlining daily parking, making it work better for people so that they understand why we're doing this and how it can help them. improving the user experience and access to information through our commuter dashboard and through the online portals and our parking coordinators, which I've been really pushing hard to try and get us to rebrand those as transportation coordinators, as I think Anna used that term, and addressing the carpooling issue of how can we price carpooling on a daily basis and get people to be able to share their costs in a sort of streamlined way, almost like a Venmo type cost sharing structure. I know companies like Scoop are looking at this, and that's sort of our next challenge, and I'd love to hear ideas from folks on that as well. So that's what I've got, and I'd love to hear some Q&A or feedback from this. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Adam. And we do have a couple of good questions here and some time to address them. So I'm going to start with a question that comes from Mary Fisher. Mary wants to know, did you negotiate a different price for MBTA riders in addition to paying per ride? And so maybe, yeah, give us a little bit more insight to the extent of your knowledge about what that negotiation was like with MBTA.
Right. So in short, no, we are paying well, we're not paying the cash fare. It's called Charlie Card in Boston. We're paying the individual Charlie Card fare for each tap. So there's no sort of special treatment for the MBTA. And what that means is really anyone could do that if they wanted. There's no, preferential agreement there. If you just sort of tape a Charlie Card to the back of someone's ID card, and that's actually how they tested to see if this would work in terms of the RFID chips. So the negotiation, this was before my time, I should say. Maybe Corey has some behind-the-scenes scoop, but it wasn't that hard to do. That the only concern was that the MBTA was worried that they'd be losing a lot of money, right? That if all of a sudden they were counting on these monthly pass purchases, every year, it was a reliable source of revenue from MIT, and all of a sudden now we're saying we're just going to pay for the taps that people make. So there's some uncertainty there, and the T was nervous, but in reality, they're actually coming out a bit ahead. And MIT isn't paying as much either. So it's kind of been a win-win.
That's excellent insight. I appreciate that. A great question from Bev Hertzlaff. Bev wants to know, do you interact with TNCs or rideshare companies? Oh, excuse me, that's not Bev. It moved on me. It's a great question, though. Do you interact any with TNCs rideshare companies as part of this program? I think that actually came from Joseph.
Right. Thanks, Joseph. So we have, I didn't mention the whole suite of programs here because this is one that hasn't changed yet, but we have one of the guaranteed ride home programs, and that's still sort of in the Stone Age with the taxi chits and the paper sheets and everything. We're trying to sort of bring that into the 21st century with a TNC partnership, but right now those aren't officially part of the program, no.
Right, and I am going to come back to Bev's question because it's a really good one. Do you make it simple to physically pay daily, or do you have to pay through a kiosk or something? What does that daily payment look like? Are these all gated lots? Is that connected somehow to some other system? How does that work?
Oh, yeah, excellent question. I should have touched on this. So it's all centralized through employee ID cards. So your transit pass is on your ID card, and your parking permit is on your ID card. So every morning you just tap your ID to get into the lot. At the end of the day, you tap it to get out. And then that cost goes right onto your payroll deduction. So in terms of the pre-tax benefits and everything, that's all done through payroll, which on the plus side makes it easy for employees to just have that sort of as a thing behind the scenes. But on the negative, it makes the cost a little less salient. It makes it less noticeable for people. So from a behavior change perspective, that's sort of the downside. If people actually had to pull out cash, that's really the best way to get people to notice how much it costs. But of course, you want to make it a little painless.
And so it sounds like all of these are gated lots then that they're having to tap in and out of. Is that right?
Yeah. About 80% of our spaces are gated, and the remainder people still get annual permits, and that's sort of based on location constraints.
Cool. Adam, thank you so much. Again, we've had tons of questions on this really engaging topic. It's so cool to see how programs like this evolve, what you learn, and what you see to improve in the future. So thanks for being a part of this, and we look forward to hearing back in a couple of years from somebody else at MIT after you've graduated about how successful this has been. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you around.
Thanks so much.